Donald Trump has feelings about vaccines.
The MMR, I think, should be taken separately. This is based on what I feel. The mumps, measles, and all the three should be taken separately. And it seems to be that when you mix them, there could be a problem.
This from the same press conference where his administration warned pregnant mothers not to take the over-the-counter painkiller we know as panadol.
I want to say it like it is. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take it. If you just can't, it's fight like hell not to take it.
Doctors around the world are begging people not to listen to what comes out of the White House.
Paul Offit, who's a leading US paediatrician and vaccine researcher, he's called this moment the most dangerously irresponsible press conference in the realm of public health in American history, which is saying something because, of course, President Trump did once advocate drinking bleach to get rid of COVID.
We should say at the outset, Donald Trump's press conference and our RFK Jr.'s press conference today on acetaminophen, pregnant women and autism was filled with medical misinformation and bad information for women. We know that because doctors all over the map, including at the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, rushed to refute what he was saying. His own FDA refuted some of what he was saying.
The things that were said at that press conference aren't based in fact. And so pediatricians are going to be, they're going to feel like they're on the defensive, having to defend practice that is based on solid evidence and we have decades of experience with.
This after Trump appointed as US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a conspiracy theorist who promotes long-debunked and damaging theories suggesting autism is linked to vaccines.
By September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures.
So you can come up with that answer where you stop taking something, you stop eating something, or maybe it's a shot, but something's causing it.
Now, most of the world will be rolling their eyes at this level of misinformation, but not all of it, and that's a problem.
Of course, what goes down in the United States doesn't stay in the United States. So it's not something we can sort of close our eyes and pretend is just happening there, because it does overflow here, and those narratives overflow to here, and distrust in academia, for example, can occur regardless of where you are.
That's Associate Professor Helen Petousis-Harris, a vaccinologist and co-director of the Global Vaccine Data Network. I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, the very real damage done when misinformation goes viral.
It certainly travels faster and further than any virus we've ever come across. This is batshit crazy stuff.
Later, I'll be talking to a scientist who works in a New Zealand lab that creates vaccines about the globally connected work being done here on mRNA. But first, Helen Petousis-Harris, who says she didn't realise when she became a scientist that she'd also become very well versed in misinformation.
It's unprecedented, except it's not anymore, is it? Because we've had this exposure for quite some time now, nearly 10 years.
I mean, you could sort of say, all right, well, why would anyone take any medical advice or any advice of any sort actually from Donald Trump? But during COVID, we looked to our leaders for guidance on exactly this sort of issue.
Yes. And what I think some politicians did was to try and unify people. But what I guess a more authoritarian politician might do is use these as opportunities to divide people, because by dividing people, you can gain or maintain power. And we saw this play out, for example, in my world, but in relation to vaccines before the 2016 elections over in the US. And it was almost hard to believe. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but of course it was well and truly proven, written up, peer-reviewed, published, was that the Russians had actually interfered. And one of the things they did was to use, for example, narratives about vaccines and to use what you call bots and trolls and spread that through social media. So narratives that were very detrimental that used some key sort of propaganda tools, and also narratives that were more positive. And what you're trying to do there is separate people out and polarize them against each other. And that was the strategy. So it had been done there, and now we've seen that play out over and over again.
And by the way, I think I can say that there are certain groups of people that don't take vaccines and don't take any pills that have no autism. Does that tell you something? That's currently, is that a correct statement, by the way?
No, but you had fun out there, and that's all that matters. But, for the future, typically a president should check something before announcing it to the nation.
Do you think New Zealand is importing these same misleading narratives?
Absolutely. And we saw that, of course, on steroids during COVID, where a lot of the narratives that were being disseminated in New Zealand didn't originate here. They were picked up from overseas. And that is, I guess, also one of the reasons that some actors will do this is to erode the trust in institutions and in, say, scientists, and in this case, when it comes to infectious diseases, medical doctors, etc., erode the trust in them and remove their voices, I guess, and their leadership in these spaces, because they're a hindrance. This isn't new. This is a tried and true playbook, and this is what we are witnessing right now.
But we've gone a step forward in the States, haven't we? Because those very institutions that where once bad actors looked to remove trust in them, those very institutions are now untrustworthy. I mean, you wrote a blog that talked about the ACIP. What's happening there? This is the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunisation Practices. Should have been a science-driven, transparent organisation. Is it now?
No, it's been completely repopulated. If it didn't have such serious consequences, it would be laughable. And of course, we've seen the CDC and the heads of all of these organisations be systematically replaced over there by loyalists, I guess.
So we've gone from a situation where people aren't trusting institutions to a situation where the institutions cannot be trusted.
Well, not those ones, no.
Yeah. And there's some quite interesting contradictions being employed too, I think, aren't there? Like, for instance, one of the things that was said in the White House press conference, where they dragged out a couple of mums of autistic kids, was believe the women. Like, nobody's been believing these women.
I am just so grateful to President Trump and the entire administration for finally listening to moms who have been crying out for help, for answers for years. I've met so many other moms with children on the spectrum in the 9 years since my son's diagnosis, and they all have very similar stories, and they've all just wanted somebody to listen, to not ridicule them or look at them like they were the crazy people. It's hard when you don't have doctors that take the time to really listen and find out when the change happened and what change happened.
But these are women who are convinced that something they did, vaccinate their child, caused their child's autism. The believe the woman narrative has grown out of actually women being ignored by the medical profession. And now it's being used for something quite different.
Yeah, the power of the narrative. And maybe we need to separate it, the idea that you mustn't dismiss and ignore people. And this is where I think that you can end up driving people away, is when a person has a concern or a person thinks something has happened, believes something has happened. Maybe it has, maybe a vaccine has caused a problem. It might be real, it might be perceived. But regardless, that person needs to be listened to. And also working through whatever the problem is. And often they feel dismissed. And as soon as you do that, of course, you push people away. And often, if there's a community that supports what they're saying, that community will grow and, of course, have a very loud and very influential voice, because we as humans respond to the messenger, and we respond to that story, the emotional narrative. So it's a very important narrative, but it doesn't necessarily have the data to go with it. And sometimes, unfortunately, that just doesn't matter.
But if you have an issue, you feel gaslit, that no one is listening to you, it would be pretty easy to latch on to something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, who appreciates being gaslit and ignored?
I just want to ask you about something else Trump said, was that the MMR vaccine should be split out because it's a problem to mix them all together. It's terrible. It should be separated out.
You take it in smaller doses and you spread it out over a period of years. And they pump so much stuff into those beautiful little babies. It's a disgrace.
Is there any truth to that?
There is a partial truth. Not the MMR vaccine being split up, absolutely not. But we also have a formulation that adds the chickenpox in with it. So MMRV, V for varicella, and that is a way to get those 4 in a single injection, which is can be a great choice. Really, you can have 1 needle or 2. So 1 can be a real advantage, but there is a small increased risk of what's called febrile convulsions. So that's those sort of fever fits that some kids can have.
Like kind of an overload of stuff going into their bodies.
Yeah, and they sort of fit these sorts of seizures. They're benign, but scary for the parents. So there's a small increased risk of those. So parents in the US had the choice when the kids had the second dose that they could have this option, and now that's something that they wanted to take away and not use that vaccine anymore. I guess at least they've still got the vaccines available,
right.
But you've taken
so they've taken away MMRV, but you can still get MMR and the chickenpox vaccine in America.
Just at this stage, but I don't think we should become too complacent that will remain given the current trajectory that they seem to be on.
What do we do here?
Yeah, no, we don't have it available here. It's been discussed. I think you can in Australia as a second dose. So you have 2 doses of MMR, and you can have that option of you can have that one as your second dose. We don't here, so it's not really an issue. So at the moment, that doesn't sort of affect us. What I think it will affect, though, is just people worrying about they're going to see MMR vaccine and worry.
You say in your blog, you use the phrase, the weaponisation of uncertainty. Can you expand on that for me?
Where people become uncertain and afraid and polarised, all of those things, is where there's then opportunity for certain political agendas. And the only reason I kind of, I'm talking about this as somebody who's really focused on vaccines is because vaccines have been used in this way. So sort of faced it over and over again during the years, and people have written a lot about it. So essentially, what you want to do if you're one of these sorts of authoritarian types is you want to gain power, and one of the things, you've got a playbook, and one of the things you do is you need to scare people. And essentially, you can scare them using something like horrible vaccine narratives and autism and things like that, things that scare people. And essentially, that's what I mean by weaponizing it.
As a scientist, it's very horrifying to hear all of this.
Since COVID, New Zealand's done its own research on vaccines. The mRNA lab, based at Victoria University, has developed more than 500 vaccines in just 2 years, although the testing process is a long one and none of them are on the market yet.
Hi, I'm Isabelle Montgomerie. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in Lisa Connor's group at the Malaghan Institute of Medical Research.
Isabelle is part of a group developing, designing and testing mRNA vaccines, the newest kind of vaccine that's more refined and targeted than older style immunisations, and they're also easier and faster to make.
We're part of a network of lots of different labs working together to build capability to make mRNA vaccines in New Zealand. So there are other groups that are making mRNA vaccines against like multi-drug resistant staph. And there are also other groups within New Zealand that are optimizing how we can best make different parts of the vaccine. So best make the mRNA itself, or best make the lipid that encapsulates the mRNA. So it's really different labs all across the country working together to build this capacity in New Zealand.
And I guess that capacity building is of utmost importance now, especially when we look at the funding cuts coming out of the states.
Yeah. I think it's really important that New Zealand have this capacity to make its own vaccine. New Zealand is its own country and it has its own health needs. We're a small country, we're really separate from the rest of the world. And so it's possible that there could be a pandemic that affects us more than it affects other countries. Our health priorities might always not be the same as other countries. And so having the capacity to design and test and manufacture our own vaccines allows us to be responsive to our own population's needs. And it's also not a given that in a pandemic setting, we would necessarily be able to buy vaccine from other countries.
Right, because there'd be hoarding or there'd be shortages elsewhere or issues like that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are the particular health needs that New Zealand faces that other countries don't have such a high priority in fighting?
A lot of our health needs are the same as other countries. As developed countries, we have, in influenza, SARS-CoV-2, and infectious disease, measles, and things like that. But in a pandemic setting, it's we don't know what it would be, what a pandemic virus would be, and whether a zoonotic event would happen in this part of the world, and sort of a hypothetical virus wouldn't spread elsewhere, for example. Also, of course, diseases that affect Māori and Pacifica.
Right. You mentioned staph diseases before. Is that a particular thing here?
Yeah. Those are a problem all over the world, and we have issues with staph and strep in particular in New Zealand. We have incredibly high rates of rheumatic fever in New Zealand.
So that's the sort of thing you're talking about, diseases that disproportionately affect Māori and Pacifica.
Yeah.
This kind of capacity, pre-COVID, was there not really seen a necessity for it in
I would
New
say
Zealand?
no. Yeah, I think that COVID, I think, awakened, the government to how important this kind of research is, the capacity of mRNA vaccines to protect the country. Earlier work done by Vaccine Alliance Aotearoa. Earlier in the pandemic, we made a protein-based vaccine, and it showed that we do have this capacity to make and design and synthesize vaccines in New Zealand. Previously, most of the vaccine manufacturing capability was in veterinary vaccines, but we are able to scale that up and start making human-grade vaccines in New Zealand. So the COVID pandemic showed both that this was necessary, but also that we did have the human capital in New Zealand to do this.
And when you're out socially and people say, what do you do? Have you ever sort of encountered resistance or the belief amongst people that vaccines overrated, or, any other sort of thing we're seeing seeping through from the States, any of those attitudes?
Well, yeah, personally, socially, only once I was at a party and someone asked what I did, and she just said, "Oh, I don't believe in that." And I thought, that was interesting. I think, vaccine hesitancy is, something that you always, need to take really seriously.
So how did Isabelle and her colleagues react to the recent health news out of the White House?
I think among, a lot of people, that's kind of like a rallying cry of it. It strengthens people's resolve that this kind of research is really important, that vaccines do save lives. But at the same time, a vaccine is a drug that you give to a healthy person. It needs to be taken really seriously, the decision to recommend a drug. And I know that our health agencies and our government does take this really seriously. But ultimately, there needs to be a really high degree of trust between the population and the government in order for the population to accept giving a drug to a healthy person, giving a drug to a healthy child. And so the issue with this, it runs quite deep. It's a problem of public trust.
Are you and your colleagues worried that with this latest thing from the White House that the vaccine hesitancy could increase?
Yeah, definitely. I think, there are so many diseases that people don't have any kind of context with or any kind of understanding of. Measles, polio, people are so disconnected from them. The lifelong disability, the death that comes from these kinds of diseases. If they're led to believe that these vaccines aren't safe or that they're not necessary, there could be really serious public health problems. And it could also leave us less able to deal with a future pandemic. If we can't vaccinate the population, then what happens? We haven't in our lifetime seen a disease evaporate. So I'm 32, and in my lifetime, I haven't seen a disease evaporate like older generations saw with polio. And so
That sort of breeds complacency, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah. And I think in New Zealand in particular, with COVID, we didn't see what New York saw. We didn't see freezer trucks of dead bodies. We were pretty protected from the pandemic. And then we had really, really quite high vaccine uptake. We didn't see the onslaught that other countries did. And so, yeah, like you said, there's a risk of complacency.
And in terms of what's coming out of America, how do you combat that kind of misinformation?
Well, I guess with good information. I think people, the risk with all of this information is that it's undermining people's trust in science. And the real risk in it is that there's a feeling that people aren't trustworthy, that scientists are trying to hurt you, that you can't trust the science. But we're not trying to, we've dedicated our lives to this. We feel really passionate about this, that we want to save lives.
And almost more worrying than disinformation for scientists is America's politicisation of the sector and massive cuts in science funding.
There's so much research that has to happen before things can go into the clinic, and the continuity of the research is really important. And so these really massive, abrupt cuts in funding are going to have impacts for decades and decades. The ripples of this disruption are going to run really deep.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production, supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to Helen Petousis-Harris and Isabelle Montgomerie. I'm Alexia Russell. Ka kite.